Greetings, everyone. We are so glad that you are here with us today. We've got lots and lots of folks that are going to join us, so we're going to give people a couple of minutes to stream on in and say hello in the chat, please. Tell us where you're from. Tell us a little bit about what you do, maybe, why you're here. We're very excited that you're here today. We're going to be talking about homelessness and maybe expanding our vision of what that means and what that looks like. So welcome on board, and we're going to give folks a few minutes to trickle in. Oh, here they come. Y'all are coming. I see you. Welcome, welcome. Can you move to the next slide, Jonathan? Thank you. Just a few more seconds. We'll let folks come on in. We're expecting about 500, so we're getting there. I'm watching the little numbers come up. Thank you, everyone, for being here. Thank you for sharing part of your day with us. We're going to go ahead and get started. My name is Michelle Adkins. I work with the Prenatal to 3 Capacity Building Hub, which is a project of BUILD, and it is funded by the Pritzker Children's Initiative. And my partner in this journey with us today, you want to say hello?
Sure. Good afternoon, good morning, everybody, wherever you might be. I'm Ngozi Lawal, and I'm co-moderating with Michelle Adkins. Really glad to be here and really glad that you all are here for this really important topic.
Yes. So this is the 5th webinar, Ngozi?
It is.
In our Whole Child, Whole Family, Whole Systems webinar series. And we are going to, again, talk about homelessness and maybe have you think about it in a different way. So you can go to the next slide. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about that's very important. Thank you. Before we go any further in the webinar, we're going to talk a little bit about, we do have live Spanish interpretation, and Diego's going to give you some instructions on that.
Thank you, Michelle. Hi, everyone. Hopefully you can hear me okay. I'll give these brief instructions in English, then repeat them in Spanish. Doy las instrucciones en inglés, luego en español. I'm Diego Pons here with the CLC, Community Language Cooperative, so I'll be your simultaneous interpreter for today's meeting. After I give these brief instructions, the host of the meeting will activate the interpretation option here on Zoom. At that moment, you're going to see a globe icon that's going to say interpretation that will appear there in the bottom right-hand corner of your computer screen, there in the toolbar. That globe icon will say interpretation. I ask you to please select the globe icon and to choose your preferred language. If you're joining the meeting today on your cell phone or tablet, please look for the More button or the 3 dots button there in the corner of your device, which will allow you to find the interpretation globe icon that way. If you're not fully bilingual, I strongly encourage you to select your preferred language so you can listen to the interpretation in case anyone were to say something in Spanish and you would like to know what they're saying. If you're bilingual, my recommendation for you would be to not select the language channel. That way you can just listen to everyone in their original language, and you don't have to worry about manually switching back and forth on your device whenever you decide you want to speak a different language. As always, just please pay attention to the speed in which you're speaking. Just please make sure you're speaking at a conversational pace. Please make sure you don't speak at the same speed in which you read material. And if you have any questions, you can let us know through the chat. Thank you so much. Buenas tardes a todos y a todas. Yo soy Diego Pons. Estoy aquí hoy con un grupo llamado el CLC. Voy a ser el intérprete simultáneo para la reunión de hoy. Cuando termine de dar esas instrucciones, se va a activar la interpretación. En ese momento va a aparecer un icono globo a la tierra que va a decir interpretación ahí abajo en la derecha de su pantalla. Le voy a pedir que por favor elijan ese icono globo a la tierra cuando aparezca en su dispositivo y por favor seleccionen su idioma preferido. Si hoy están asistiendo a la reunión en su celular o en su tableta, busque por favor la opción que dice More MORE, que quiere decir más en inglés, o un botón de 3 puntos ahí en la esquina de su dispositivo, lo cual le va a permitir a usted elegir su idioma preferido de esta otra manera. Así que si usted no es completamente bilingüe, yo le voy a aconsejar que elija su idioma preferido para que pueda utilizar la interpretación cuando la gente esté hablando en inglés. Si usted sí es bilingüe, se puede sentir bien escuchado a todos hoy en su idioma original. Y como siempre, por favor, asegúrense de no hablar a la misma velocidad en la que lean material. Si tienen alguna pregunta, déjenos saber. Muchas gracias. Ready to start?
Okay, thank you so much. Everyone, make sure that you select the language that you would like to hear our today's webinar in. I think we're ready to go to the next slide. So we want to just give you a little bit of information about who everybody is here today. We have over 1,000, we have over 1,000 registrants, which is very exciting. And we have 49 states and the District of Columbia represented here. You are from state agencies and child and family serving organizations and nonprofits, and colleges and universities, and child care resource and referral agencies, hospitals and health organizations, faith-based organizations. So we're so glad that we have such a wide variety of people who have joined us today, and we hope and we know that you're going to get a whole lot out of the webinar today. So let's take a look at some of the titles and the roles that you play. So Strategic Initiatives Coordinator, we have a lot of those who registered, so welcome, we're glad to hear you. Parent Information Center Directors and Family Engagement Specialists and Community Health Workers, Federal Project Officers, welcome. Evaluation Specialists and Prevention Coordinators and Family Service Specialists and Accountability and Quality Improvement Managers. Thank you so much for being here. We're very excited to share this information with you. And I'm now going to turn it over to my co-moderator, Ngazi Lovell.
So we're in for a treat today. I want to tell you a little bit about our webinar series. If this is your first time joining us, this is the Whole Child, Whole Family, Whole Systems webinar. And we have been having conversations across the country with you all about how to think about what are the challenges that keeps us from serving families in a whole child, whole family centered way. So we are listening to family voice. We are thinking about how to make the systems more equitable for everyone so that all children and families can be successful. And we're thinking about how do we use data in a way that helps us improve our systems, and we are learning from real world examples. So we're thinking about how to make these topics that we're discussing actionable and how to sustain them over time. Next slide, please. For today's objectives, we are looking at the voices of family and family with lived experience and thinking about how we make sure that policy and practice actually lines up with the families that we're indeed trying to serve. And we're thinking about the effects and impacts of homelessness on child development, particularly during the first 3 years of life. And we're pulling everyone into this conversation. Everyone has a role to play, whether you're a frontline service worker, meaning, perhaps you're in a Head Start program, a pre-K program, childcare, or maybe you are working as a home visitor. If you are working directly with families, this conversation is for you. If you are playing more of an intermediary role and you are perhaps a policymaker or you are an advocate, this conversation is for you as well. And so we're going to be looking at what are those actionable strategies, and we're looking at family voice. We're looking at what the broader national picture looks like, and we're going to be zooming into South Carolina's approach. So looking at a state perspective on this topic. Next slide, please. And so I'm going to introduce our presenters in just a second, but Jonathan, if you could take us to the next slide. I want to begin today's conversation with the images that you see. And so I'd like to ask you, what do you see? These are some of the most common visuals that appear when you search for the word homelessness online. These are images that often depict people on sidewalks, under bridges, in a tent, or holding signs. And sure, these signs reflect real scenarios and real experiences, but they really only represent a fraction of the full story of a family. And even in these images, we cannot truly see the people. Just look for a moment and you'll notice that for the most part, their faces are hidden, perhaps they're blurred or shadowed. People experiencing homelessness are often captured through the lens of their condition and not as full human beings. And so these snapshots, they leave out so much of the real story. They do not show the family quietly living in their car, the child bouncing between relatives' homes, or the mother and her infant spending their nights in a shelter and their days trying to maintain routines. So today's conversation is about expanding how we view homelessness, not only through what we see, but also by acknowledging what we don't see. So it's about reflecting on some questions like, how can we truly serve or support people we don't fully see or haven't truly learned to see? So to help us guide our discussion today, we are honored to be joined by a group of dedicated leaders whose lived experience, research, and community work bring powerful, powerful insight to this conversation. We are eager to begin with Daryl Savell. Daryl is a parent advisor on the Homeless Children and Youth Steering Committee under the Oklahoma Commission on Children and Youth. Daryl's voice is a powerful reminder of the importance of lived experience in shaping responsive, equitable systems that serve children and families. And through his advocacy, he brings forward the realities and resilience of families navigating homelessness, ensuring that parents are not just heard, but active partners in decision-making. After Daryl, we are excited to hear from Erin Patterson, a national leader who has spent nearly 2 decades bridging the world of education, policy, and advocacy. As Senior Director of Strategic Initiatives and Partnerships at Schoolhouse Connection in Washington, D.C., Erin elevates the needs of children and youth experiencing homelessness across the early childhood and K-12 systems. Her career, from classroom to Capitol Hill, shapes national conversations on how to build more inclusive, child-centered systems. And then finally, we're really thrilled to welcome Amy Dubé-Weller, who serves as the Homeless Support and Parent Referral Specialist at the South Carolina Child Care Resource and Referral, which is such an interesting title to have at a child care resource and referral agency, and she'll talk more with you about this later. Amy is a tireless advocate who brings both community-based experience and strategic leadership to her direct work with families. Previously, she served as a McKinney-Vento liaison, foster youth champion, and a trusted leader in family resource networks. Her dedication to meeting families where they are and her belief in the power of connection and care serves as a model for how local supports can truly transform lives. So together, Daryl, Erin, and Amy reflect essential perspectives needed to rethink homelessness, not just as a housing issue, but as a whole child, whole family concern. And so to help set the tone, we're going to begin with an impactful video that tells a compelling and eye-opening story of the often unseen experiences of family homelessness. And while Jonathan is queuing up the video, I want to thank our funders at the Pritzker Family Foundation and the dynamic team at Build who makes it possible for Michelle and me to bring these important webinar topics to you. So those people include Susan Hibbard, Omotunde Shalali West, Jonathan Chapman, Ingrid Molinares, Exandria Toombs, Tony DeBurro, Mariana Floret, and Crystal Williams. Thank you all so, so much. And so Jonathan, we're ready whenever you are.
I've survived a suicide attempt. I've survived 24 times being stabbed. I've survived a heart attack that had me dead for 30 minutes. This is Daryl Savell. This is me. I was sexually molested at 3 years old. And at 3 years old, I knew it was wrong at the time. Didn't know how to face this, okay? Not being able to face it, I kept this in for a very, very long time. And I didn't let it go. You just know that every once in a while you sit back and you say, I don't want to remember what happened. I believe it was 14 years old. I ended up getting so depressed that I shot myself. So they put me into a mental hospital for 3 months. Not thinking that what had happened at 3 years old is exactly what triggered that. Those issues that are taken on and they're fed by alcohol, smoking some meth and doing a rail, doing a line. You know, it was a vicious, vicious cycle. I was a functioning alcoholic for a long, long time. That's where it all became to where I lost my home. You know, I lost my job. I didn't care anymore. I ran into this girl and she gets pregnant. When she gets pregnant, they take the baby from us. She was born with methamphetamine in her system. That's when I realized I wasn't gonna do it anymore. You know, that's the second I said, I can't do it. If I want her, I'm never gonna be able to do this ever again. She needs me more than anything. I knew her mother was gone. Her mom told me, she said, I never wanted a child. You know that. I wanted a heroine for the rest of my life. That's what I wanted. We had bounced from place to place for a little while, motel to motel. We ended up on the streets and under the bridge to be calling and calling and calling, man. All of the shelters. I'm taking her to steal with me to get food because all of you guys are closed. I'm standing there holding my baby girl and not have anywhere else to go. I enrolled my daughter into Positive Tomorrows. We got our caseworker. I told her the situation, and they came up with a city rescue mission. When I opened those front two doors, man, let me just tell you, I could feel the openness. My journey has just begun. We go to the playground, and Bella starts moving around and starting getting to know all the other kids, you know, and she's happy. And to me, I'm looking at her just thankful that I can have both eyes on her now. Instead of one for the wrong reasons, I got both eyes on her for the right ones, man. And I thought to myself, man, this is your chance too. They want you to be able to move forward and not only have stable housing, but also have the resources that you need to be able to move forward in society and in our community. In October, I had a heart attack, and it was myself and just my 4-year-old daughter, Bella. How long she must have sat there begging for me to get up before she knew something was wrong. How scared she must have been because of everything that she's lost. And she ran out that door and she went to get help from the staff, and they came back and started trying to revive me. They recorded my death at 28 minutes on that day when EMT showed up on site. If I would have had my heart attack while we were living under the bridge, that baby girl at 4 years old would not have made it. She would have been dead or trafficked. To me, the City Rescue Mission creates magic. I started walking with God the day I walked into those doors, because how can you explain any of that and being alive again? I'm on a new journey. Everything I do every day is for a reason that's going to change something, and that's because of the City Rescue Mission. You don't see too many single fathers that are out there coming in. And a mother's love for their child is like nothing else. But it's also the same for a father's love. She's just 5 years old, man. She loves slides. She loves everything that a 5-year-old would love to do. And I just want to do it with her, whatever it is. Because it's always us. It's always me and her. If God says, I only let you back here to make sure that Bella was okay, now it's time to go, I'd be happy with it. I know that she won't be under that bridge. I know where she'll be. And I've got it all set in place. She'd be all right. You know? And she knows she'll be all right. Journey has just begun.
And now we present Daryl Savell to you. Daryl?
Thank you. Hello, everyone. I'm so grateful and thankful for being here and being a voice for the state of Oklahoma on this issue. In my personal life, I have experienced harsh realities of homelessness, moving from hotel to hotel, couch surfing wherever we could, and ultimately living beneath one of the most dangerous bridges in Oklahoma City. As a single father to a 5-year-old daughter, I fought tirelessly to find shelter, only to be met time and again with closed doors and waiting lists. During that time, her safety, emotional development, well-being were constantly under threat. Living in survival mode forced both of us into a world where safety was never guaranteed. I often had to sleep with one eye open if I could sleep at all, while my daughter absorbed the fear and instability around her. A child in the environment that we lived in learns to live with uncertainty. And though hope remained in her heart, the effects of that trauma didn't disappear when we left the streets. Today, the aftermath is woven into her daily life. My daughter struggles with anxiety, hypervigilance, disruptive emotional development. Simple things like loud noises, unfamiliar places, or being separated from me can trigger fear or panic. Her senses of safety remains fragile, and her ability to trust and regulate emotions is something we work on every day. The trauma she endured so young continues to influence her ability to grow, learn, and thrive like other children her age. Her development has required and still requires ongoing care, patience, supportive interventions to help her feel secure and to rebuild the foundation that is shaken during the critical time. As a single father of a pre-K student who has faced homelessness, I want early childhood professionals, policymakers, and service providers to understand that behind every family in crisis is a parent fighting hard to create stability. I've navigated shelters, slept in cars, still showed up every day trying to give my child a sense of normalcy. What we need is not pity, it's partnership. Recognize the strength it takes to just show up, make systems easier to access, treat families with dignity, create spaces where our children can feel safe, seen, and supported. Your consistency, empathy, and willingness to listen can make the difference between surviving and thriving for both the parent and the children. When asking to reflect on my journey and what could have made a difference, looking back, the supports that could have made the biggest difference for my daughter and myself weren't just about shelter. They were about stability, understanding, and dignity. Timely, compassionate help that saw us as a family in crisis, not a number on a list. However, when you ask what was missing or unattainable, immediate access to safe shelter for parents with children. The shelters we contacted were full or had long waiting lists. Some didn't accept fathers with daughters at all. In those moments, we didn't need long-term plans. We needed a safe place to sleep that night. We are not alone. Our story is one of many. And to truly support families like mine, we need practical changes that reflect our reality on the ground. We need to expand flexible, trauma-enforced childcare. Pre-K programs must be equipped to support children who are experiencing or recovering from trauma, instability, and major life transitions. These children need understanding, not punishment. Parents should not be penalized for attendance issues when they are doing everything they can just to survive. We need to better train all frontline staff in empathy and trauma awareness, from shelter workers to school clerks and healthcare providers. Every interaction matters. A single compassionate response can be a lifeline to a parent under pressure. A moment of dignity that can change the trajectory of a child and their caregiver. So in closing, I want to thank each of you for being here today and for allowing me the opportunity to share my story. I speak not only for myself, but for every parent, every child, and every individual who is fighting day and night, not to be another statistic, not to be written off or forgotten, but to become someone who matters. We fight for safety. We fight for dignity, for the chance to be seen and supported, not judged. And while our struggles may be heavy, our hopes are even heavier. What we need from our leaders are systems built not just with policies, but with compassion. Thank you for listening, not just with your ears, but with your hearts, because when voices like mine are heard, changes become possible. And when that change happens, it tells families like mine, you're not invisible, you matter. Thank you so very much.
Daryl, thank you so much. Your words and your courage, your heart that you've shared with us today, we're just so grateful that you allowed us into your story and family's experience. I know it's deeply personal, and I know that many of us are sitting with your words right now, and I'm hoping that we will be able to carry them forward, not just in today's conversation, but in the work that we all do in our different ways beyond this space. And you said some really important things: pity, not partnership, and understanding and compassion and not punishment. That those are really powerful words for us to take with us. And now to help us step back and look at the broader national landscape, because Daryl's story is the story of many families across the country, to look at the broader national landscape and how systems and policies can better address the realities that we just heard. We will turn to Erin Patterson for a national perspective. Erin, please go ahead.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you to the Build Initiative and team for inviting me on this webinar. Especially thank you to Daryl. I want to continue to share space for him. I saw so many emoji reactions and gratitude and praise coming in. I encourage the audience to continue sharing your feedback with him for him telling his story. My name is Erin Patterson. I am Senior Director of Strategic Initiatives and Partnerships at Schoolhouse Connection. And on the next slide, just a little bit about Schoolhouse Connection if you are not familiar. We are a national nonprofit advocacy organization, and our mission is overcoming homelessness through early care and education. We work from prenatal to post-secondary, ensuring that every child, youth, and young person experiencing homelessness has access to the educational and other services that we know can help them succeed. So I encourage you to check out our website for more resources and information. But what I really want to start with today on the next slide is turning our attention to a conversation about homelessness, starting with the definition. I always like to start my presentations grounding us in the definition, because many people do not know that we currently have two different federal definitions of homelessness. And the definition that I think most people are familiar with is through the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, or HUD, H-U-D. And that defines homelessness as those staying in a shelter or those who are visibly unsheltered. So thinking back to the images that Ngozi shared at the start of the webinar, that is typically the image most people have when they hear the word homeless. What I'd like to do is walk you through what we call the education definition of homelessness on the next slide. It's a federal law known as the McKinney-Vento Homeless Assistance Act. It applies to all pre-K through 12 educational programs, as well as all early childhood programs, which we'll get into in a couple slides. But for now, I want to ground us in this definition. The short version is homelessness is children and youth who lack a fixed, regular, and adequate nighttime residence. All of those things must be in place when you're assessing a child's living situation. And there are typically 4 categories that this can fall into. The first 2 that I'll talk through are what you're already probably familiar with, those who are staying in a shelter and those who are visibly unsheltered. Importantly, this includes domestic violence shelters. That's especially important, unfortunately, when you are working with young children who might be victims of domestic violence and who might be in a domestic violence shelter with a parent. The other 2 parts of this definition are important. The first one I'll walk through is the second bullet on this slide, which is that homelessness applies to those who are living in motels and hotels. And this is important because oftentimes families might get evicted and they might have enough cash to pay for a couple nights in a motel, but they don't have enough to put down first and last month's rent on a new place. And so many families with children find themselves hopping around from motel to motel, which of course can disrupt many things in their lives, including the child's access to early childhood services. The last part of this definition that I'd like to talk through is the top part of your screen there, sharing the housing of others due to loss of housing, economic hardship, or similar reasons. And this is commonly referred to as doubled up homelessness. And thank you in advance to our Spanish translator. There's not a perfect translation of this, but doubled up is just that. You're sharing the housing of others. And it's really important to understand how this impacts young children and families in particular. We call this hidden homelessness because about 75% of school-aged children who are homeless are staying with others. They are in these doubled up living situations. On the next slide, I want to put a little bit of a finer point on what this looks like. As I said, we call this hidden homelessness, and there are many reasons why families might stay temporarily with other people. You heard, and you've heard people in the chat sharing that there often are no shelters available in their community, or you heard from Daryl, the shelters that are available will not accept the family unit or they're full. And so shelter is not an option for many families with young children. If shelters are available in the community, many of them prioritize adults and usually single adult males. And so families with children, again, are turned away. It is not an option. There's also a fear among families that if they do show up at a shelter and try and gain entry, that they will then be referred to the child welfare system and the family will be separated, and many other reasons why families might stay with others. This can look like many different things. We've heard more recently families of 3 or 4 renting a walk-in closet in someone else's home. It could be staying with an abusive or exploitive partner, which leads to trading sex for housing. It could mean unsafe sleep practices because there is not adequate space for an infant or toddler. Certainly inadequate play spaces, and it could mean a host of other things. And I wanted to put a finer point on this and paint a really specific picture of what this looks like, because as you can imagine, the impacts on child development can be significant. And I'll put in a plug that Schoolhouse Connection has a resource that I'm hoping we can get in the chat about why we use the phrase experiencing homelessness. And it is in part for this reason, because the federal McKinney-Vento definition of homelessness includes that you can be sharing the housing of others. You can be staying in a house, but still be considered homeless. And for that and other reasons, we say experiencing homelessness because terms like unhoused do not give you the full picture. So moving on to the next slide. I want to get in a little bit to our data. And so you heard Daryl's story from Oklahoma. It's important to say in Oklahoma, there are over 7,000 more infants and toddlers going through the same experience that Bella, Daryl's daughter, experienced. And nearly 11,000 children under 6 in Oklahoma are experiencing homelessness. On the next slide, you'll see that we've seen an increase in recent years of families who are staying in shelters and who are visibly homeless. So you can see that in 2024, there was a 39% increase in the number of families with children who were visibly homeless. And that does not include those who are doubled up. On the next slide, you'll also see that approximately 450,000 infants and toddlers experienced homelessness across the US. This is data from the 2022 to 2023 program year. Approximately 450,000 children ages 3 and under experienced homelessness across the US, and that is a conservative estimate. We call this an estimate. We have very good reason to say that it is a conservative estimate, and there are undoubtedly more young children who are experiencing homelessness. On the next slide, you'll see that that was an 82,000, that was an increase of 82,000 from the previous year. So again, homelessness among children, particularly infants and toddlers, is increasing and has increased in recent years. And on the next slide, you'll see that we know from a multitude of reasons, infants and toddlers need access to both early childhood development and housing, but they're not getting it. And this is our main concern and our main priority at Schoolhouse Connection. You'll see here that of those 450,000 babies who experienced homelessness, almost 90% of them are not served by an early childhood program. That is alarming. It goes without saying the impacts that homelessness can have on young children, and the data is alarming. On the next slide, this is just a QR code to our data report. Thank you to the Build team for dropping the link in the chat. You can go view this report, and each state has its own profile page. So I encourage you to check out the data for your state, look at those enrollment numbers for early childhood programs, and use that as a starting point, no matter your role and position. And I want to transition to the next slide about the consequences of homelessness on young children. Again, I think many of you are on this webinar because you are early childhood development professionals. I will not belabor the impacts to development, but we do have research and data at this particular intersection that I think it's important to highlight here. Homelessness in infancy in particular has been found to be associated with delays in language, literacy, and social emotional development. We also know that the younger and longer a child experiences homelessness, the greater the toll of negative health outcomes. And the impacts of homelessness on young children are long-lasting, even once families are housed, meaning if a 3-year-old experiences homelessness for 6 months, those impacts will last until they're 6, 7, 8 years old, both physical and developmental impacts. So I want to move us on to the next slide to show that homelessness also has long-term consequences. I'll draw your attention to the middle bullet here. High school students who experience homelessness are 10 times more likely to become pregnant. And high school students who become pregnant are then 10 times more likely to experience homelessness. And so right there, we have a high schooler who is experiencing homelessness and who is now a parent to a baby who is born into homelessness. This is long-lasting, and these can have generational impacts. On the next slide, I want to talk a little bit about the importance of early childhood, but the barriers that homelessness creates. So we know that homelessness is bad for development, therefore children need access to early childhood, but families have problems getting that access. And you can see here some of the difficulties: transportation, lack of necessary documents to enroll, and then lack of awareness among both providers about what they are required to do to serve homeless families, and lack of awareness among families that they are entitled to services. And on the next slide, and I'm keeping an eye on time here because I really want you to hear from Amy and hear more from Daryl in Q&A. On the next slide, you'll see that there's also dwindling federal support for housing. So we talk about this twofold issue. Families experiencing homelessness need access to both early childhood and housing. We're not getting our babies who are experiencing homelessness into early childhood programs. And at the same time, support for housing for families has been dwindling. And you'll see there the share of subsidies going to families experiencing homelessness has declined from 42% to 33%. And on the next slide, you'll see some more specific barriers that families experiencing homelessness face when trying to access housing in particular. And I won't read all of these, but the first bullet I think is really powerful, that only 1 in 4 families that qualify for housing assistance actually receives it. And so that is alarming, that it's not for lack of trying, it's that they are not being connected. And you'll see that last factoid there. It's actually babies, which are the age group at highest risk of eviction of all age groups, including adults. Babies are at the highest risk of eviction. On the next slide, just as families face barriers to housing, families also face barriers to accessing shelter. Shelter can be a very important transitional piece for families, but they're also not able to access it, in part because of that restrictive definition of homelessness that we started with. The more narrow definition through the Department of Housing and Urban Development does not recognize families if they are self-paying for a motel, and does not recognize families if they are staying with others or doubled up. And so they are shut out of access to these types of support and assistance. On the next slide, I want to talk a little bit about how systems are responding in the midst of all of these challenges. And I promise that I will get through my last slides quickly so that we can hear from Amy next. On this next slide, I wanted to give you a sense of what all of our early childhood programs are required to do in order to meet the needs of families experiencing homelessness. And if you're an early childhood provider at any level, I hope that this is the one thing you will take away from this webinar today. Head Start and Early Head Start, early intervention, childcare, and MCV or home visiting, they all have requirements to identify and prioritize children experiencing homelessness. We include summaries of each state's requirements in our data report that Build team linked to. And so that's another piece that I encourage you to look for no matter where you are. You'll hear more about how South Carolina is implementing their childcare requirements in just a few minutes. On the next slide, just to give you a sense in general of what states are doing to help alleviate these barriers, help families experiencing homelessness access early childhood programs. This is from state child care plans. You'll see that they offer extensions and grace periods for submitting eligibility documentation. That's a federal requirement that every state must meet. 24 states also waive co-payments for families experiencing homelessness. And 22 states waive work requirements or proof of income requirements for families who are experiencing homelessness. On the next slide, you'll see a couple ideas of how states are trying to remove barriers to housing for families with young children. That includes prioritizing expectant parents on wait lists for public housing, using their Medicaid Section 1115 demonstration waivers to provide more flexible housing options, and expanding eligibility for housing vouchers through early childhood and housing partnerships. On the next slide, just a few teasers of some states and what they're doing. Of course, you'll hear from Amy in South Carolina next. You heard from Oklahoma. Their Commission on Children and Youth is prioritizing this very, very heavily. New York is using their Medicaid demonstration waiver. Nevada used their preschool development grant funds to prioritize access for families experiencing homelessness. And Connecticut's Head Start on Housing program is doing a fantastic job of routing housing vouchers through their Head Start and Early Head Start programs. We could do a whole webinar just on this slide, but I want to keep us moving here. So on the next slide, just to put a few ideas in your head about what more should be done. On the next slide, you'll see an opportunity. Schoolhouse Connection is thrilled to be joining in partnership with the organizations you see listed on your screen. Thank you to the Build Initiative for putting the link to this in the chat. We are called Thrive from the Start, and our goal is to bridge the silos between early care, homelessness, housing, health, and other systems for infants and toddlers and their families experiencing homelessness. You can find out more on this website. We have a policy agenda that is currently out now, and hopefully will give you some additional ideas of actions to take. On the next slide, you'll see the categories of that policy agenda, including expanding access to both early care and education and housing and shelter programs, integrating services, and improving data collection, namely through aligning our definitions of homelessness at the federal level. On our next slide, I left you with a few ideas of how to get started. You can research, you should absolutely listen, and then take action to improve access to services and outcomes for children and families experiencing homelessness. My contact information is on the next slide. Again, thank you so much to the Build team. I am thrilled to be part of this conversation, and I hope to learn more from you all.
Thank you, Erin, so much. Wow, so much information. I'm going to definitely have to go back and look at the slides again. And yes, everyone, you will be getting the slides in a follow-up email that we will send to everyone who registered. Just the different definitions of homelessness and the impact that that has on families with children, the increasing numbers of families staying in shelters, and 450,000 infants and toddlers. And that's just an estimate. I'm sure, and I know that you believe it's undercounted. So thank you so much for all of that information. I am so pleased to introduce Amy Dubé, who is here from the South Carolina CCR&R, or Child Care Resource and Referral. And she has a very unique position for a Child Care Resource and Referral. And so we are very happy to have Amy here with us to share with you what she does and how she does it. Thanks, Amy. Take it away.
Thank you. Thank you, Michelle. And thank you all for being here. I'm excited to share with you about what we do. Thank you, Build Initiative, for putting this on, and for Erin for tapping me into this. So I appreciate it. I'll just share a little bit about my role. Like they said, I am the Homeless Support and Parent Referral Specialist. I work for South Carolina Child Care Resource and Referral. Every state has a Child Care Resource and Referral, and for short, you'll hear it, it's CCR&R. My next slide will talk a little bit, or rather prompt me for how do I prioritize families experiencing homelessness and accessing childcare. So referral specialists work with families statewide for free, and we help them locate childcare that meets their needs. We ask them how old their children are, what types of childcare schedules that they might need, any other detailed information that would help us perform a search. And then we also ask to see if they need help navigating financial assistance resources. And if any parent indicates that they're experiencing homelessness through a question on our intake form, they are referred directly to me. And I think if you'll click on the next slide, we'll show an example of, this is the question that's on our intake form. And this is one of the most important things that I think I could share with other service providers. I think mentioned in my introduction, I was a McKinney-Vento liaison before this role. And a lot of what I saw in that role for other services as well as school resources was the question on intake forms: are you experiencing homelessness? Yes or no? And that question is not super effective because, as Aaron stated, 75% overall, and for me personally, 80% of the families that I work with are doubled up. And that means that they're temporarily staying with friends or family. And those families wouldn't necessarily say that they were experiencing homelessness. They would say, I'm staying with my sister. I stay in a house. I'm not experiencing homelessness. But these families are qualified under the McKinney-Vento definition. And so to expand this question, instead of saying, are you experiencing homelessness, yes or no, we then give them a multiple choice option. They can select more than one of these. But this gives more of a purview, more options for folks to state what their current living situation is. And it doesn't leave it up to them to have to know the federal definition, which I think most families would not know that there's a McKinney-Vento definition. And that's the work that we need to do as service providers to make sure that we're expanding or educating folks on the definition. But this at least allows people to answer what their current living situation is. So if they mark anything other than rent or own my own home, they get referred directly to me. And I work with these parents one-on-one to understand their needs and to connect them with possible childcare options in their area. I also work with them to help them apply for the childcare subsidy through our state. For us in South Carolina, it's called the DSS Child Care Scholarship. And the scholarship can be traditionally tricky for folks to navigate the application process, knowing the documentation that they need, knowing how the process works. So I work with parents one-on-one over the phone or text or whatever's easiest for them to help them apply for that. We have a great process here in South Carolina. We have a good connection with our Department of Social Services, where I have an expedited way of helping people apply for the scholarship. I'm sorry, I think I need to slow down for the translator, so I apologize. But I help people apply for that scholarship and then explain to them the process of how that would be used, which childcare providers they can use it for, and how that whole process works. And then once they're approved for that scholarship, I don't say, see you later, call me next year. But if they have any questions about that process, I am there to help, more of like a caseworker or a one-on-one assistant. I text with families all the time about any questions that they may have about childcare or the subsidy. So by having a role like mine that works specifically with families experiencing homelessness, I can help them by connecting them and navigating other resources as well. So if they mention that they have school-aged children, I connect them to their McKinney-Vento liaison in their school district. I also, if they mention that they need housing supports, I do look at, we have 4 continuums of care in South Carolina. And so I refer folks to local shelters in their area, as well as helping people apply for SNAP. I don't do that, but we have a resource that can do that. So just all kinds of resources that I can help connect them to, depending on what they say that they might need. And let's see, let's go ahead and go to the next slide. Some common barriers that families face when trying to secure childcare. Transportation is one. I worked with a mom yesterday who explained to me that she is on the bus 2 hours in the morning to take her child to childcare, and then for her to get to work, and then she goes to work, leaves, and is on the bus again 2 hours in order to accommodate the childcare and her job, which obviously limits the amount of time she can work if she's on the bus that amount of time. So transportation is a big issue. Openings and vacancies. This is difficult for any family looking for childcare, regardless of their housing situation. As many of us with small children know, there's a childcare shortage across the country. But this can be difficult for families experiencing homelessness. Sometimes at shelters, there's I'm working with a family, they've got a 30-day limit that they're allowed to be at the shelter. So they have to find those resources very quickly and to be able to connect. So making sure that they can find openings and vacancies can be difficult. There are also registration fees and waitlist fees that can be associated with childcare. And it is up to childcare providers and their policies on whether or not they're willing to waive those fees or whether or not they're willing to wait to be reimbursed by the scholarship for those fees. Many parents that I work with say, I found an opening, but I have 3 kids I need to enroll. It's $125 per child, and those costs add up. And that is a difficulty, and up to the provider to decide whether or not they'd waive those fees or work with the family on a payment plan or something like that. And then finally, there are just complicated and confusing processes, not only for the voucher or the scholarship, but also overall in general for all of these programs and resources that are available. We all might have similar names. Maybe childcare is in a lot of our names. So they say, I think I talked to somebody here, but it's actually that they've talked to Head Start. And so helping families really kind of organize and understand who is who. And that, I think that's up to us as service providers to make sure that we are working together well and having those connections in between providers so that we can provide warm handoffs for families and really make the navigation process much easier. That's up to us. It's not up to families. Then one last thing I would say for a barrier is understanding the definition. Like I mentioned, I don't think a lot of families might know the definition, which is totally understandable. And also a lot of service providers don't know the McKinney-Vento definition. I think more folks are familiar with the HUD definition just in a shelter or on the street, but not a lot of folks know about the doubled up piece, which is like I said, 80% of the families that I work with. We'll skip to the next slide, which is how do I coordinate across systems? As I mentioned, we have a great relationship with our DSS here in South Carolina, where I can help folks apply for the subsidy in an expedited process. One other thing I'll mention is that South Carolina allows for presumptive eligibility for this type of, for their homeless initiative category. And that means that families experiencing homelessness are allowed to receive the scholarship for 3 months as they are job searching. They are not required to be working or enrolled in school in order to receive it, as long as we can prove their housing situation. And this is huge because you cannot work if you don't have childcare, and you can't have childcare if you don't work traditionally in these subsidy situations. So that is one piece that we're very grateful for in South Carolina. We also coordinate with the McKinney-Vento liaisons around the state. And as I said, I refer to continuums of care and local shelters. And I receive a lot of referrals back from these resources as well. McKinney-Vento liaisons refer their families to me when they're trying to find childcare, and homeless shelters as well will refer their folks to me because I have a pretty quick process for helping people find childcare. My next slide is what lessons or practices. I would say, and I think this will be on the next slide, there's a screenshot kind of, and I think it'll be shared out as well in follow-up. This is a little bit about this position. My position is funded through the Child Care Development Fund grant, through that block grant of money, sorry. And so to utilize existing funding to create a position like this, I think would be one example. And then one thing that I do is I also talk to childcare providers and talk to them. The biggest thing I'm focused on with folks is educating on the definition of the McKinney-Vento definition of homelessness, is to make sure that providers understand that so that they can refer families to me for that subsidy or scholarship. And I think that wraps up my piece. I think there's a next slide that just has my information, my email address at the top. If you'd like to reach out, please feel free. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Amy. We really appreciate your deep dive into what you all are doing in South Carolina, and for showing us how your priorities are being put into place and put into action. I know that we have so many good questions from the audience, and we have been gathering them. And so we are going to transition right into our Q&A portion of our discussion. Again, I want to thank Daryl Savell and Erin Patterson and Amy Dubé for your wonderful, wonderful presentations. Okay, so Michelle, I'm going to turn it over to you because I know that you have some questions that you've gathered, and we'll let you kick off the Q&A section.
I do. Thank you so much. And I'm so excited that we have a good bit of time for the question and answer portion. Daryl, you mentioned that you had a heart attack, that you were clinically gone for 28 minutes. And that was sort of a reset moment in your life. And I'm wondering if you can talk to us about what supports or services are helping you now as you continue your journey in your new direction. And if you want to, what services you needed back then as well.
A lot of the services that I gathered, that was a hard time in learning how to rebuild. Clinically dead after 3 minutes, your brain loses a lot of memory and thought process, and having to navigate myself through raising a child, at that age, and also building myself back up it was a big barrier that I had to overcome. But I made a big step in where I am now, and trauma informed counseling and support groups were a real big help with my journey and what I had going on and facing homelessness and getting over that bridge. How I did places like North Care. I went to North Care and they helped with healing, staying connected with the community, because being a part of the community, I realized that all of the different resources that we have all combined into one made one huge resource. And if I stayed connected with one, I could always follow into another. And when all of them connect in the state of Oklahoma, then you start realizing that it's not just the one state. All the connections come together and it becomes national and it becomes worldwide. And all of our information can come from just such a small area to be built into one big uh, connected universe is what I call it. Is so big for me. Neurodiverse family support and therapy is also real big, and it's key with moving forward with stability and hope within homelessness, I believe.
Thank you, Daryl, so much for that. I appreciate it. I think Ngazi has a question for Amy now.
Amy, you and we're constantly thinking about how to connect what we're learning from parent voice and how to connect it to practice policy, in other words, the real world. And so when you think about the words that Daryl shared earlier about how early care and education systems need to really be trauma informed to support children and families who are experiencing homelessness, I thought about that. And then I also thought about what you said about your work. And in your one pager, I read that part of the work that you do is to train childcare providers about how to support families who are experiencing homelessness. And so I was curious about when you're doing your trainings, what are some of the themes that you are sharing with these childcare providers so that exactly what Daryl was talking about in regards to being trauma informed, that now shows up in how childcare providers care for children, all children, but specifically children who are experiencing homelessness?
Right. Yeah, this is a great question. And I will say that the majority of the training that I'm doing with childcare providers is um, educating on the McKinney-Vento definition of homelessness, those rights that families have federally. And then I'm also talking about a strengths-based perspective of families to talk about that families experiencing homelessness, that is an experience that they're currently going through. It does not define them. It is not a forever thing. And that these families that are coming in, they have a lot of strengths that we need to acknowledge as service providers and as teachers in their classroom as well. So one thing that I had to catch myself as a McKinney-Vento liaison, I had to start asking the question, what services or programs are you already connected to? Because sometimes I think we look at it and we say, oh, they're going to need food, or we are speaking for them without hearing first what they have already tried or what they are already receiving. That's the other thing is I'll say, oh, there's this resource in your area. And they'll say, yeah, I've tried that and I can't get a hold of anybody and I've already called them. And so I have to catch myself and ask what their experience is already. And so I think that The same for teachers in the classroom. I want them to look at families with a strengths-based approach and say, you are resourceful. You have gotten your children into childcare. You have found the scholarship. You have these resources within you already. You're resilient. You are dealing with a lot and you are able to get your child here when you can, and we appreciate that. But looking at families through a strengths-based approach and not a deficit, we like to train on ACEs, but we also really need to train on resilience when we talk about ACEs. ACEs can be very, negatively focused, and it's great to get that information out, but we need to talk about resilience in the same hand. So I think that I hope that answered the question. I think that we really need to talk about strengths-based and trauma-informed as well. I think that's true for all children, that it would be nice for teachers and providers to be trauma-informed, not just families experiencing homelessness, but all children. But those are great trainings and terms for folks to be familiar with. And people have to let go of what their expectation or what their thought of homelessness is. That you shared at the beginning, those pictures. And I do that in my training. I say, these are the pictures that show up, but this is not not all families are experiencing what these pictures show. And so we really need to let those stigma that we have, we need to let that go when we're working with families that are experiencing homelessness.
Thank you, Amy. That was so clear and so insightful. And I just want to make sure that everyone who is perhaps new to this early childhood conversation is keeping up. So ACEs refers to the adverse childhood experiences. And so that has to do with traumatic events that children face before the age of 18 that can have long-term impacts on the child's health, their development, and well-being. So thank you for explaining that, Amy, and the approach that you use with child care providers. That's so very helpful. Well, let's bring Erin into the conversation. Michelle, do you have a question for Erin?
I do. I do wanted to just point back to Amy's comments about strength-based approach and link it to the notion of dignity that that Daryl talked about, and that I think we do sometimes see more deficits than we do strengths. And clearly, Daryl's story demonstrates that it takes a lot of strength. And it takes courage, and it takes being willing to be vulnerable. And these families are willing to do that because they want their families to be whole. So thank you, Amy, for bringing that up and reiterating that notion of dignity for us. We're going to go a little bigger picture now and ask Erin a question about, if you could name one or two things that you think states could do right now to better connect families experiencing homelessness with early care and education programs, what might you say?
I think the most important thing for states to know and be able to do is to implement the existing requirements regarding prioritization of children experiencing homelessness. And that's across systems. As we've talked through, that includes HUD homeless assistance, housing and urban development homeless assistance. It also includes Head Start and Early Head Start, childcare agencies, home visiting providers, and early intervention, as well as your pre-K to 12 school systems, public school systems. So it's important to know what the federal statute requires if you are working in one of those federally funded programs. It's important to know steps your state has taken to go above and beyond those requirements, which many states have. And it's also important to be able to tell other people what your agency is required to do, because there's probably another agency in your state working with that same child and family experiencing homelessness, just with a different service. And if we can encourage and harness better collaboration across systems, then I think that will go a long way to helping families experiencing homelessness in the moment, but also helping to ensure that children experiencing homelessness now do not grow up to be adults who experience homelessness.
Thank you, Erin. That is one of the things that we are hoping to result in this whole webinar series, which is to make the clear point that each of these silos, each of these systems must reach out to each other and must be connected to better serve families with young children. It's a whole family and it needs to be a whole system that's serving them. So thank you for reminding us of that. Daryl, I'm going to come back to you for a second. Someone from the audience has asked, well, she works with families, but she's not sure she would necessarily know if a family is lacking housing or is homeless. She wants to know how do you approach that? How do you ask a family from a strengths-based approach? How do you talk with them about homelessness, which can sometimes be seen as a very negative way? And so I'm just wondering, what's your take on that, and what might this caregiver ask or say that would put the parent at ease enough to talk about their situation?
A lot of times, that's a wonderful question, because we don't want to call people homeless, families homeless, directly like that. It takes away from the trust that a person or a family has within somebody asks them. And if we're trying to provide something for them and resources, we have to be able to make them feel trusting of us. And so they're in survival mode when you're homeless. All families go in survival mode, and they won't want to disclose anything. If you ask them, hey, are you homeless or are you staying in a shelter, that puts up a block for them. And that survival mode comes in and they don't want to talk about it. But we could ask questions more like, where are you staying tonight? Where are you and your child staying tonight? Or are you staying from house to house? Are you staying from couch to couch? What do you feel like where you're at right now is safe or stable? And that opens up a line of trust and a door for them to want to open up and talk to providers to so that we can find out what needs that we could give them as far as resources to make them feel safe and have hope within the system and anyone speaking with them. So I would say not to ask direct questions about being homeless or in a shelter.
Great, thank you. So it's more about expressing your care for them and
Finding out what resources that they need. You know, our job is to find out what resources that they need, that we have, that we can offer, that will make them feel safe, to help them with the trauma that they have, because the trauma coming into any situation is what leads to your alcoholism, what leads to your drug addiction. And without finding out what that trauma is, sometimes we don't know what that trauma is until later on in life. And we might need a resource that would help us to get to that trauma that's within us. We're all arrested in development at an early age. Sometimes we don't even realize when that is or what that is, and we need help to find that. So in order for us to be able to get in and earn that trust with somebody that's facing these fears, is we need to ask them the right questions that aren't so forward.
Thanks, Daryl. That's great. I appreciate that.
If it's okay, I'd love to jump in. Daryl, I love that you just made that so plain and clear. There's nothing academic about that. And I feel like what you're doing right now is empowering every person that is a part of this discussion to think about, what power do I have in these situations, and how can I be showing care and compassion for the children and families that I serve, whether it's directly or even more removed from like a policy perspective or a lawmaking perspective. You also talked about thinking about how to make sure that we're talking with families in a way that builds trust and compassion, and that we should be thinking about how can we get the services and supports that we have to offer to families. And you talked about your journey and what's helping you. I'm curious if you would be willing to share what kinds of services and supports are helping your daughter right now at this point. What's most useful for her at this point?
right now for Bella, the best thing is stable housing. Okay, the stable housing for her, and also being she needs to have consistency in her daily routines at all times. Uh, the trauma that she has come through, we're thankful to have North Care on, to have the trauma informed caseworkers that we have to deal with those situations. With going back to school and she started in Putnam City Schools in Oklahoma City, and the teachers that were there are all trauma informed, and they know how to deal with trauma afflicted children. And when she went in, they have a service called it's called I'm so sorry at this point, I'm losing my track, but Talking Points, which creates a lifeline for the teachers and the parents to be able to get in touch with each other at all times during the day. So with her trauma going in during the days, and she also has ADHD. So with going in, sometimes she would get on one of her kicks in school. Sometimes it would be, I miss mom. And they don't know how to directly deal with that, but yet they will try, and with all the methods that they've learned how to deal with her trauma. And if they can't deal with it, they'll call home and they'll say, Dad, Bella's having a hard time today. What can we do? All right, well, let me get with her and try to reboot her. And so it gives a line in between for the teachers and the parents to come together, whether they're at school or at home. They always come to me and say, we have this issue. How can we do it? And we do it together. And that's the togetherness that's most important, is to be able to contact those teachers, the teachers be able to stay in touch with the family, to be able to make her feel safe. She feels safe at school, knowing that they talk to me and I talk back to them. She knows that there's that line. If there's something that she can't get in touch with me, by losing me for that many minutes in time, and for being the one that found me that night, she fears losing Dad again because there's no one else to go to. So when she started going to school, that fear was still embedded in her. But the teachers at home at school knew these issues and knew how to deal with them. And they've helped tremendously. For Mother's Day, they knew that Mother wasn't there. So they made a form out to include her with all of the plans, to where she picked another person to say Happy Mother's Day to, or just to show that she cared about. And that took her feelings away from what was going on at home and kind of pulled it all together. And I thought that was just such a wonderful thing to have, is just the communication within our community, within our schools. And Amy, I think that you've got it dead on right there when we talk about our children in schools, and how we just need to be more cooperative and have everyone come together. That's just the key in having our children as early as pre-K, growing up into college. We need to make sure that everything is embedded to them, and everything is complete with our coming together with the teachers and ourselves and the community.
I just want to make a point that there are some things that cost money and there are other things that do not. And I feel like what I'm hearing from you, Daryl, is that yes, there's resources that need to be put into trainings that would help teachers and school administrations learn how to be trauma informed. But then when you're talking about things like communication, like communicating to families about, how the child is doing during the day, those are some things that don't cost. And I'm just raising that up and lifting it up because I think one of the things that cripple us in our work sometimes is around feeling nervous that, well, we don't have the money to do this. We couldn't possibly afford to roll out or implement this new thing. But some things don't cost a whole lot. And so I just want to just lift that up, and maybe this is a good opportunity to ask Erin a question about funding, right? When we think about this work, there's public dollars, private dollars. What should funders, Erin, think about when they are investing in this space? What opportunities do you see for them?
It's a great question. I think in addition to the direct services that are still so desperately needed across communities across the country, you know, those infusing funds into shelters who are serving families with young children in order to make spaces developmentally appropriate so children have safe, healthy, adequate play space. Investing locally so that families experiencing homelessness have access to resources. That is a continuing need. I would also encourage those who are in a funder position to think about the longer term systemic pieces of this work that are so important. Funding advocacy coalitions to continue advancing policies at the state and federal levels that remove barriers so that families experiencing homelessness can have greater access to services. If you are a local community private funder, consider creating a childcare scholarship for families experiencing homelessness. We know that state subsidy dollars can only go so far, and there will always be a need to have access to those opportunities and resources. I think for us, the big picture goal is the long-term impacts of the action. And so encouraging those, whether you have money to give away or not, think about how your actions will create long-term impact, not just at a systems level, but thinking about Bella, thinking about what are the things I can do? What are the actions I can take so that in 10, 20, 30 years, Bella is living her happiest, healthiest life, despite being through the experiences that she has been through.
Thanks, Erin. That is tremendous. And I love that it is sometimes about the money, but it's also sometimes about how you approach serving and distributing the funds and setting up the requests for proposals. So not just sending out or asking people to apply for specific programs, but really taking that more systemic look and how they can work together. And Amy, I think that is one of the things that you at the CCR&R are doing that is not happening in most cases. I don't think, in terms of having a homelessness advocate there within the child care resource and referral. And we are all about, sort of connecting and working cross sector. And I wonder, what gaps do you see? I mean, you are part of, you set up a hub in terms of pulling programs and people together, but what are the gaps that you see when you are working with homeless families?
I think that I see a lack of communication across service providers. And back when I was out in California, we were working on getting a CIE, or Community Information Exchange, which is a system where local nonprofits can and clients or community members would have to opt in, but then they would be able to manage the services that they're receiving, and service providers could refer to other service providers through technology. And I think that we are at the cusp of starting to utilize that kind of technology to try to really build up this field. But that's what I see a lot of, is a lack of communication with service providers. And I think that could be solved through utilization of technology or utilization of common forms. I think that, I spoke with a family this morning who was trying to get Section 8, but she couldn't reach anybody at Section 8. She was trying to, work with the shelter that she had been with a few months ago in order to get information about these other services. And so just that communication piece is huge. And, she was mentioning she was trying to call somebody at Section 8 or at one of these services, and they didn't have a voicemail set up. Well, there are these things that we really need to make sure that we are providing the best services that we can in this field. And that starts by just empathizing with folks and making sure that we are making ourselves available and going that extra step, those warm handoffs. I try not to say like, oh, here's the number for HUD, here you can call it. I try to say, oh, here, call Anna over at HUD. Here's her number. I'll send her an email to let her know you're calling. So some of those warm handoffs would be helpful.
Right. And taking the time to build the relationship so that that Anna is at HUD and is available to take that family's call.
Correct, which can
Um,
be hard statewide, you know,
Yes.
that is very difficult. But
Yes.
again, with the utilization of technology and kind of statewide resource lists or you know, services like that could be helpful.
Great. Thanks. And Gazi, I think you have one last question for, is it Erin?
Yes, I do. So we've talked a lot about this topic, and I feel like there's been such depth provided with all of your presentations. I'm curious, Erin, in your work, what are some of the misconceptions that you can clear up right away for people who are wanting to work in this space or already work in this space? Anything you can clear up just for our closing thought?
Absolutely. I know there are 2 or 3 that I'll quickly run through. I know I sound like a broken record, but I think one misconception is around the definition. People don't understand still the broad McKinney-Vento definition, and they don't understand the services that are attached to that in early childhood development and pre-K to 12 programs. And so ensuring that people understand what that looks like, what homelessness looks like, that most of our children experiencing homelessness are staying with others and it's hidden. And then the second piece related to that is there's a misconception that homelessness doesn't happen to babies, but it does. Babies are the age group most likely to be evicted. You saw our data, nearly 450,000. It is happening to babies. And then the last piece, the last misconception that I'll put out into the atmosphere is we hear a lot that people tend to use resilience as an excuse to not intervene for the child in the situation. We've heard from parents across the country who tell us we're tired of the resilience narrative because, yes, we think that children are resilient and strong, and maybe they are now, but this trauma, as Daryl mentioned, it will show up again. And so intervening now when the child is 5 months old, as opposed to 5 years or 25 years old, is absolutely critical.
Erin, thank you so much. And we are coming to the close of today's conversation. So I first want to thank our presenters and then just tell you about what's ahead. So Daryl, Erin, and Amy, thank you so much for your honesty, your expertise, and the humanity that you brought into this space today. You've given us so much to reflect on, not just in terms of policy and practice, but how we see and support families experiencing homelessness. And I want to thank all of you. There were over 1,000 registrants for this conversation, and I know people have different obligations, so we don't have all of the registrants with us right now. But just for making the time to listen and be here and to carry these insights back into your own communities and your own work means a lot. Because at the end of the day, this is more than just a webinar. This is about serving children and families and making sure that everyone is seen and supported. So thank you for being with us. I want to just take us to the next slide so that we can close out. You can see all of the presenters' contact information on the left, and I just want to repeat it again that everyone who signed up for the webinar will receive these slides and the recording, so you can be directly in touch with the presenters if you have a question. And just look ahead to the dates coming up. We have part 2 of this conversation coming up next month, July 10th, and that's going to focus in on barriers and challenges to accessing housing, which is a more kind of focused conversation. Today is more broadly about homelessness. And then we have our other conversations on different topics for August 7th, September 11th, and October 9th. So when this webinar closes, there will be an evaluation that pops up. It's really brief. We'd love for you to fill it out because we always want to improve the quality of these webinars. So thank you so much for your time today. Please fill out the survey, and we hope to see you next month for part 2 of the conversation. See you. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.